So anyway, we're just talking about Cambodia now. So Cambodia, we went with, Libby and I went with TIR. TIR stands for Transform, Empower, and Advocate and Restore. And the TIR Australia do support organisations in Southeast Asia, and they have a tour that goes to Nepal and a tour that goes to Cambodia every year, and you can go as an observer with the group. We had 12 in our group, and the idea was that you was getting exposed to how they do their aid in those countries, and they do it through the NGOs. They don't actually run any programs. They actually support local NGOs, of which there are 3,000 NGOs in Cambodia. So there's a lot of people doing aid and helping in Cambodia, which needs a lot because of the trauma of the Pol Pot era. And we went we stayed in Phnom Penh, which is the capital, for 1 week, and we actually went to organisations in Phnom Penh and close by, and then we went down, we drove down to a place called Kep, down on the coast, about 500 kilometres away. So that was a couple of long drives. We did quite a lot of driving. It was a very strenuous tour. I found the days were long because we spent quite a lot of days. We would be driving for 3 or 4 hours, and so it was quite very strenuous.
Pretty rough roads?
No, they were just scary because you're driving down a 2-lane highway, and at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, all the kids were riding. So coming out, the primary school age kids were riding their push bikes down the side. The high school kids were riding motorbikes, scooters, and it was just 2 lanes, and everybody was. So the drive, it was just all over the place. In Phnom Penh, we went to a group called Peace Bridges, and they've actually. They're working with trying to support organisations through helping people to do conflict resolution, so that organisations can cope. I think that they can cope with the trauma of the past history of Cambodia, but also helping people to work together and not to be in conflict. And they're also advocating, supporting groups that are trying to advocate. One group is up in the forests. That group up there in the forest, we didn't actually go there because it was too politically unstable, but they're teaching them, trying to make them self-sufficient, the communities in the forests, so that they won't sell their land to entrepreneurs who'll just put in palm trees. So what's happening here, they just knock them all down and build palm trees. Well, then the local people don't have any living then, so they're trying to support those sort of groups. And they're finding that interesting, women are very good, because if there's any conflict or the police turn up somewhere and get a bit rough, the women can they don't knock the women around as much, and they can talk the men out of. They're much better at negotiating with the authorities, so that's quite an interesting thing. But we met a couple of other groups, organisations of which they'd actually been, and they've done some work with domestic violence, so helping groups with domestic violence, which Libby was particularly interested in. So they were an interesting group. We went to a group called Kodo, who do, they set up they work in the urban area where there's a lot of they're doing 2 things. They're urban areas where the government are actually reclaiming where the squatters are, all the people have squatted. And there's a place called the Black River where it's just a drain, and the people have just built over the drain. And I mean, the stench, they're actually digging up all these houses and all the mud, and the stench and the smell of where these people were living was just unbelievable. Then the government's going to move them all out, and then put cover over the. It's just an open drain. They're going to cover the drain so it's not an open drain anymore. But they've negotiated with the government that the people will get moved down the road, and we went to a couple of places where they had demountable housing. They stay in those, and then when all the slums are cleared, the people will go back to those slums, and they'll actually get a piece of. They're saying they're going to get title to a piece of land, which will only be the size of one house. But the other problem we're talking with Tia about is trying to support, financially trying to support the people to rebuild their houses, because they don't have. I mean, these are people that are squatting and who are living on a very low income, if any income. But they're actually doing a lot of getting groups to form saving groups. So you'd actually, there were 15 people in one saving group. They all put in a little bit each week, and then when they were very excited because they got up to $2,000 American dollars they'd saved over a year, and then they give little loans of $50 to somebody to start up some sort of street enterprise. And they met a woman who had got $50, and she had bought a mobile juicing machine. So she stood on the road and juiced your orange juice and coconut juice and stuff on the side of the road. So that $50 gave her not only an income, but sort of a sense of worth. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So that was, and Kodo, the other thing Kodo do, other than the slum work they do, they're providing like childcare from before kids go to school, because a lot of schooling is there's quite a lot of people going to schooling there available, but preschooling there's nothing. And what they're doing is have a facility where the kids are cared for during the day, and so it's an employment for people, but it allows the parents to go to work. Whereas normally they would, if they didn't have that, they'd take the kids to work, and the kids would run around the factory and get into unsafe, and they wouldn't get fed. So this way they get fed and they get educated, and it's an employment for the Kodo use the money to employ staff to look after those kids. So it's a win-win. It makes it makes a dollar go a long way when you're actually providing that sort of support. So that Kodo was really interesting, but they're very good at working with the government, because when we were sitting with the people who were living in these demountables, they told the local authorities that we were there, and one of the minders came along and sat in on the group, because one of the government minders came in and sat in on the group just to make sure what they were saying and what we were saying. But whereas I think Peace Bridges is more in conflict with the government, Kodo works with the government, sort of tells them what we're doing, and then they can put more pressure on the government by saying, well, look, aren't we doing a good job?
A name like Peace Bridges sounds a bit Orwellian, doesn't it?
Yeah. And then we went to some Australian couple who are working with trying to get. There's a lot of orphanages in Cambodia, and a lot of them are rackets, because the orphanage needs to have. They go and get kids from families, to have them in their orphanage, so that then foreign people will give money to look after them. So it's a bit of a rigmarole. It's never ending. You've got to have a lot of people in your orphanage to appeal to people in the Western world to give money. So what they're trying to do is to put the families first. They're trying to put children back into the families and back into their community. So they're trying to work, I think they call it families first, trying to restore the kids back to their families. So that was an interesting work. Another one we went to is a group called Just Teens. They do, they make Just Tees. They make T-shirts. Well, don't actually make the T-shirts. They print on T-shirts justice signs. So they buy T-shirts, and then they've got a little printing business, which the whole the whole business would fit in these 2 rooms. So they had a sales room, and they had 2 rooms where they printed all these T-shirts. But and we're going to order some. You can order from Australia, but you can put whatever you like on it. But they're all sort of things, justice messages. So it's called Just Tees, and they employ boys over 16, street kids, to do that work. You can't employ. Westerners can't employ children under 16 because that's illegal. So when the boys get to 16, they come off the streets and they actually work in printing these T-shirts, and then 2 days a week they could go to school. So it works out. And that was in a very slum area where they were doing that. So that was interesting. And then we went to that was in Phnom Penh. Then we drove out of Phnom Penh a couple of times and went to communities where we sat down. PNK, it's an organisation that's actually working in communities to try and set up village associations, so that the village, it's a bit like in a sort of a communist sort of emphasis of you actually get together as a village and you decide what your priorities are, and then you decide how you're going to raise some money, and they tend to. So that in one village we went into, it reminded us of going up at Elko, going out to villages and sitting in the villages under the trees talking to people. It was like that. One village, they were on near the mountainside at the back. They were getting flooding every year, so they built a dam across the top of the village to stop it flooding. But the dam is also a road, so you could access. And also it acted as collecting water, so that you actually then their water was more secure all year round, because a lot of Cambodia is very flat, and a lot of it just floods in the wet season. It all floods, and then in the dry season it dries out. So this way they actually stopped the village from flooding. They built a dam, and then. Another place we went, some of the farms, a lady had borrowed some money from the local village savings group, and she actually had bought a whole lot of cucumbers, and so this is the woman in the picture. That was her garden. She's showing us how she watered the gardens with two she was very pleased with her what did I say, cucumbers, and she was working really hard, but she had quite a variety of vegetables she'd built up and sold them in the local markets, and they actually do well in the local markets, selling because people like their fresh produce, and they like it's got no pesticides and things in it. Whereas a lot of fruit and veg comes from Vietnam, and that's all being commercially grown. And then she was telling some of the cucumbers were going to go to a wedding that's in the village. So she was and most weddings in Cambodia, you actually need to contribute something to it. So therefore she could contribute, and therefore she could go to the wedding. And then she also sold the other cucumbers at the market and was earning a living. So she was really had a very impressive patch. Be about 25 metres square, 50 metres square. That was the whole farm. So it was really, she had a lot of that all cultivated by hand. She cultivated it all by hand. Some of the other ones, we went to another one where they had some bullocks, and they were actually cultivating with a bullock pulling behind, so they were doing that. But they had a big pond, and they had started in the pond was the water for their crops, but also they'd started a fishery, so they were growing fish in that pond, and then they were selling the excess fish that they had. So they were small. And there's a photo there of a couple who make baskets. We went and saw some people that's the fish. That's the fish one, and then the other one is the bamboo, and they make them for baskets, but they also make them so they sit upside down over chooks, like a chook cage or a chicken cage, so that the rooster can't get at the chickens. They can all run. They can all run inside this basket upside down. And the bloke, he showed us how he cut down a couple of bamboo sticks and he sliced them all up into thin bits, and then he wove a basket.
How long does that last? Is it like a 3 month thing, or
the basket?
Yeah.
I think it probably depends on what you if you're storing. Like that one there where you're storing sort of potatoes or something.
Having hens hiding from roosters.
Well, you see a lot of these people actually then could have they had chickens, they had a couple of pigs and chickens, and they made these baskets, and then they went and got they had rice as well, and they actually thrashed the rice by hand. So they just had a great big basket, and they sort of banged the rice, and rice flew everywhere, but it actually stayed in the basket. So they showed us how you could thrash rice. See, rice is the main crop in and I don't know how much of I think 80% of Cambodia is flat, and so there's rice grown in all those areas. But you need a cash crop that's different from the rice, because the rice you only get 2 crops. Well, if you can get 2 crops, if you're actually using fertiliser and things, you get 2 crops, but generally you only get 1 crop a year. So you've really got to diversify your activities. So with every place we saw, there were chooks and there were pigs and there were trying to grow some cucumbers and some fruit and veg. So it was really. I mean, quite a few places we went to, we actually walked into. There was no roads into them, so they're quite isolated. And the main one of the Mekong comes down through Cambodia and then runs along the border between Vietnam and Cambodia, and that floods every year. And then, because it's so flat, it actually floods back up a tributary into a huge lake, which we didn't actually see. But I think the lake's about 400 or 500 kilometres. It's a big lake, a couple of 100 kilometres long. This lake, and so every year it needs to flood and get the backflow up in there to actually wash that lake out, so it doesn't get polluted. But unfortunately, the Chinese have built a dam on the top of the Mekong River, which is actually affecting the efficiency of that, which is for hundreds of years has worked very well, thank you. Just flood the whole area and they wash it all out and start again. So it was a lot of houses were built on stilts, because of the flooding, and some were very basic. That lady with the watering cans, her house was just a thatched house, and inside there was some poles, and then there was a thatched platform, not quite that high, a bit lower, so you could sort of step onto it. And that thatched platform was where she slept and did everything. So that was some of them are very basic.